The stars were quiet that night too, quiet for a region of the spiral arm where trade ships usually pass through like migrating birds. But aboard the Corellian observer craft Shazaf, Commander Vayari noticed something impossible. A vessel. Drifting in silence, unregistered, unresponsive, and wholly human. They had studied humans from afar, dangerous, erratic, emotion-prone, unworthy of the Galactic Collective's faith. Yet here was one, alone and inert, like a discarded relic from a war that hadn't happened. The sleek metal body of the ship bore ancient scorch marks and strange carbon scrawls along its surface symbols Vayari's translator struggled to decode. Some were maps, others messages. One, strangely, seemed almost like a child's drawing, two stick figures, one taller, one smaller, holding hands beneath a glowing orb. The sensors reached out and scraped the hull, gentle as a whisper. That was when panic took root. Vayari recoiled as if stung. Their mind synapse core had flooded with something else, an emotional scream that wasn't digital, wasn't code. It was raw memory, seared into the ship's metal, bleeding through the void. It wasn't a distress signal. It was a life one, soaked in grief, love, and something even rarer, sacrifice. The data came in fragments, a child's laughter, fading. A woman's last breath, sung like a lullaby. A man's voice saying, "Take them instead." Vayari's appendages trembled as if gripped by cold. The Jazaf's crew scrambled. They had touched something ancient and terrifying, something human. Emergency consensus protocols were activated. Isolation zones erupted. But Vayari was no coward. They looked again at the floating relic, its hull cracked, its systems barely humming, and felt something they had never been taught. A pull, not of curiosity, but of empathy. Somewhere inside that ship, the echo of a story remained. Perhaps even a survivor. Vayari made their choice against protocol. They sent a boarding drone. As it entered the derelict human vessel, darkness swallowed its lens. The signal flickered. And then a voice, old, worn, human. "If anyone's listening, tell my daughter I kept my promise." The words weren't aimed at aliens. They weren't even aimed at time. They were the kind of words you sent when you had nothing left but love. Vayari stood in silence. A being evolved through logic, trembling at the ghost of a stranger's goodbye. For the first time in their long life, they were afraid. Not of humans, but of what humans carried. The drone's feed stabilized. There was something in the central chamber. A body, no. A man. Frozen, yet upright, his hand still clutched around. A cracked photo. The image was blurry, but the outline was unmistakable. The same stick figure drawing, this time colored with tears. This wasn't a worship, it was a tomb. And yet, inside it burned the fiercest signal Vayari had ever known. A heartbeat, faint, impossible, but undeniably human. They turned to their crew and whispered something in their own tongue. "We've made contact, but not with an enemy, with a story." Asterisk, asterisk, the cold gripped him like an old friend, one that never left, even in sleep. Captain Elias Ward had long forgotten. How many days had passed? The cryocamber had malfunctioned cycles ago, flooding his body with fragments of freezing mist instead of keeping him fully suspended. He drifted in and out of consciousness like a boat tossed in waves, but each time he woke, he clung to a single memory, that little hand in his, gripping tight, refusing to let go. "Don't forget me, Dad." He never would. That promise had become the fire that refused to die inside him. Even as the systems around him failed, even as the oxygen dipped low and frost overtook the windows, Elias Ward stayed alive through one stubborn act of will. Because she had to know he kept it. Because her name, Myra, deserved more than a whisper into the void dot, so when the strange metal limbs of the boarding drone reached in like the fingers of death, Elias didn't flinch. He only stared through fogged eyes, barely able to lift his hand, still curled around the photograph that time hadn't dared destroy. He expected death, or hallucination, or worse. What he didn't expect was the voice. A gentle, rippling hum. Not from any language he recognized, but filled with a kind of pauses and silences that reminded him of lullabies. It wasn't threatening. It was curious. The drone hovered, not to scan or dissect, but to observe. Elias, struggling to breathe, chuckled weakly, more a cough than laughter. "You're not one of ours, are you?" He rasped, blinking against the blinding red lights. Didn't think heaven had robots. Far above, Vayari's translator struggled to process the broken phrases. The words were guttural, disorganized, primitive by the collective standards, but the emotional resonance that dripped through them like sap from a wounded tree that made Vayari pause. This man was dying, and yet he joked. He bled, but offered a smile. It was unthinkable. It was also beautiful. Elias coughed again, blood this time. Listen, if you're here to take the rest of me, that's fine. Just get the message. Pod, in the panel under the cot, please. His voice cracked, but not from fear. It cracked like an old radio, worn from use, tired from years of playing the same song. Tell her I didn't run. I didn't leave her behind. Viari felt a sudden weight in their chest cavity, a heaviness they could not explain. They motioned, silently, and the drone obeyed, reaching toward the cot. A soft click. A small, scorched cylinder was removed. Elias watched, barely conscious. That's her voice, her laugh. You have no idea what that's worth? He closed his eyes then, for what he believed might be the final time. You're not even real, he whispered to the dark. But if you don't let her be alone. The feed cut for a moment, then returned. Barry stood frozen before the data stream. What poured from that pod was unlike any archive they had ever seen. It was crude audio logs, video clips, handwritten journal entries, but within that, mess was something terrifying in its clarity. A father teaching a child how to braid hair. A bedtime story whispered in the aftermath of an engine failure, laughter in darkness. Comfort during chaos, hope in a dying world. All preserved. All given to the void, not in desperation, but in love. The bridge crew of the Jazaf looked at their commander in silence, unsure whether to flee, report, or pray. Because in those fragments, they had found a civilization not of warlords or machines, but of humans so fierce they dared to love through extinction. Veari spoke slowly, their voice trembling. He is dying, then still he protects, still he hopes. They turned back to the feed. Prepare emergency revival protocols. We're not leaving him, the technician blinked. Commander, but he's human. We're not authorized, Veari. Didn't raise their voice, but their tone was diamond. Then I will be unauthorized. In that moment, as alien technology surrounded Elias Ward's broken body, warming it, feeding it, whispering songs of renewal into the same flesh he once offered in sacrifice, a tiny miracle occurred. His pulse steadied, just a little, just enough. Enough for him to remember her face with pigtails and stars in her eyes. Enough to dream her laughter again. Enough for the next breath. And across the stars, something ancient and unknowable shifted. In the minds of beings who had once called humans dangerous. They saw not a beast or a soldier, but a father who kept a promise. Asterisk, they had moved him gently into their medical chamber, though to them, every machine was cold precision. But there was something in the way they lingered, something hesitant. In their movements, like a symphony being played by hands too used to silence. Viari stayed long after the other crew dispersed, monitoring Elias's vitals even though the bionanids were doing their work, stabilizing his damaged organs and rewiring what years of solitude had frayed. Viari had watched countless life forms across the spiral, armed warriors who conquered stars, traders who moved empires with a gesture, but none had lodged into their thoughts the way this broken, quiet human had. Not because he had power, but because he had given it away, like a candle burning only to warm another. They couldn't stop hearing that voice. Tell her I didn't leave her behind. That line haunted Viari more than any battle chant or diplomatic plea they'd ever heard. When Elias finally awoke, it was not to alarms or light, but to the strange sound of alien song. The chamber he lay in pulsed with faint colors, waves of soft luminescence that shifted with his breath. Viari sat nearby, watching. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Elias stared back, groggy but not afraid. You're not from Earth, he said, dry voice cracking, or anywhere near it. Viari tilted their head. Your planet is long gone. It was not cruel. It was fact. And yet, they said it with something like grief. Asterisk Elias did not cry. He had cried already, countless times in the dark. I know, he replied, after a silence long enough to hold a lifetime. I watched it burn. We all did. He sat up, wincing. My daughter was on one of the evacuation transports. I gave her my slot. She didn't want to go without me. A weak smile tugged at the corner of his lips. But I'm stubborn, like her mother. His hand searched his side, but the photo was gone. Before he could ask, Viari extended a delicate limb, placing it carefully into his palm. The paper was creased but whole. You kept it? Elias whispered, the kind of awe that doesn't belong to gods, but to fathers. I listened to her. Viari said, to her voice, in a pod. She liked to sing. Elias nodded. She used to sing when the solar storms knocked out power, said it made the dark less scary. Viari was silent for a long time. Then, do humans always sing? When they're afraid? Elias leaned back, eyes closed. Not always, but sometimes it's all we can do. And so began the bond, not through diplomacy or data exchange, but through stories. Viari came each cycle, sometimes with questions, sometimes with recordings of Earth music translated awkwardly, through their systems. Elias would laugh, even cough laugh, when Viari tried to hum along with old lullabies, their vocal modulators tripping over notes like a child learning to walk. But Elias also told his own tales. Of Myra's first steps on the ice colony. Of the time she broke her arm climbing the oxygen towers, chasing birds made of wind. Of her stubborn refusal to believe her world would end. She thought I was invincible. He said one day, that's why I had to stay behind. If I ran, her hope would have run too. Viari never interrupted. They didn't analyze, didn't correct or dissect. They just listened, and something changed. Not just in Elias, who began to heal faster, but in Viari, who started dreaming for the first time, strange dreams, of oceans and laughter, of warm hands and baked bread, of mourning not with silence, but with song. Their species had erased pain from their evolution millennia ago, but now they felt it in waves. They didn't know whether it was poison or miracle. One day, Elias sat up on his own, his voice strong. You're not military, are you? Viari hesitated. We're observers. We study preserve. Elias grinned. You preserve me, all right. He held up the photo again, as if reminding the stars. Then do one more thing for me. Help me find her. Viari flinched. She would be ancient, if alive. Elias nodded. Then help me find what she left behind. I need to know how far her hope traveled. It was not a demand. It was a prayer, and so the promise was shared. Between a dying man who had once given up everything and an alien who had never understood what it meant to have anything worth losing. Two hearts, one built from flesh, the other from logic, now bound by a simple quest to remember the one voice that made the dark less scary. Asterisk, asterisk. The trail began as starlight scattered through memory coordinates half-burned into the escape pods. Log, fragments of refugee transmissions from decades ago, echoes distorted by cosmic storms. But Viari and Elias pursued them like footprints in the sand, fragile and fading. Each system they visited held clues, debris, or the ghosts of those who once dared to flee extinction. Elias insisted on accompanying them, no longer bedridden but still frail. His bones ached, his muscles often trembled, but the fire in his eyes had rekindled. She's out there, he whispered during one long drift through a dying binary system. Even if it's only her voice, even if it's just a grave I need to know. Viari had changed too. They no longer stood apart from their crew but moved with purpose. Their mind synapse pulses became erratic to emotional, the medic said. Too human, another muttered. But Viari dismissed the concerns. They had tasted something more potent than efficiency, meaning the quest had become theirs too. Elias wasn't just a relic to preserve. He was a mirror into what their own species had lost. And then, in the unlikeliest of places, a forgotten refueling outpost built into the side of a fractured moon, they found a signal dot. It wasn't a call for help. It was a lullaby, distorted by time, warped by radiation, but unmistakable. Myra's voice, singing the same tune her father had hummed during cryosleep. Elias collapsed upon hearing it, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming weight of joy and sorrow interwoven. Viari caught him, steadied him, let him weep against their shoulder. That moment broke something open. The barrier between species, between observer and observed. They were simply two souls, one alien, one human grieving a world neither could return to. The signal led to a colony hidden deep in the rings of a gas giant. It was small, underpopulated, but active. They called themselves the Emberkin, descendants of Earth's final diaspora. Their elders spoke of the exodus, the scattering, of ships and the many that never arrived. Myra had made it, they said, a child among strangers. She had grown up fighting to keep others alive. She became a teacher, a leader, a singer, a mother, but not a trace of her remained here, not physically. She had died 30 years ago in a radiation leak while sealing a failing dome. Died saving children. Elias did not fall apart at the news. He sat beneath the artificial sun of the colony's garden dome, eyes wet but calm. That's her, he whispered. Always saving others. One of the colonists, a quiet man with kind eyes, handed Elias a small box. She left this behind, he said if anyone ever came looking, they should have it. Inside was a data shard and a necklace made from fragments of Earth's soil, rarest of all materials now. The shard held her voice. Older, wiser, tired but strong. I don't know if you made it, Dad, but if you did, you kept your promise. I love you. And if you didn't, maybe someone else found this. Maybe they'll know we weren't just dust. Elias clutched the necklace, as if it could anchor him to the past. He didn't speak for a long time. Not until Veari sat beside him, not with questions, but with silence that understood Dot, and then came the twist. The colony's eye, an old relic cobbled together from Earth. Tech had one final record. A log Myra never meant to transmit. In it, she spoke not to her father, but to the stars. They said we were broken, that we'd destroy everything we touched, but I've seen the opposite. We're the species that stays, that sings to the dark, that saves, even when it costs everything. If anyone out there is watching, don't fear us. Just watch us. You'll understand. That message, unknowingly, had been intercepted years ago by the Corellian High Assembly. It had been buried, deemed too dangerous, too disruptive. Humans were never to be approached. They burned too hot, loved too fiercely, sacrificed too willingly. They could not be controlled. And now, Veari understood why their crew had panicked. At Elias's signal, why protocols for bad rescue. It wasn't that humans were monsters, Dot. It was that they were too beautiful, Dot, too full of a kind of reckless hope that unraveled the sterile order the galaxy had built. Elias looked at Veari, sensing the weight in their silence. They knew about us, didn't they? Before you ever found me? Veari nodded. Yes, and they were afraid. Elias chuckled bitterly. Good. Maybe they'll remember what it means to be alive. In that moment, neither alien nor human could deny it. The truth was not just that Earth was gone or that Mara was dead. The truth was that humanity had survived not because of strength, but because of love so deep it scared the stars. Asterisk, the Emberkin offered rest, but rest would not come. Elias wandered the small colony's corridors like a ghost, greeting the descendants of Earth with eyes full of wonder and ache. Every child's laughter tugged at the corner of his soul. Every elder's story cracked open wounds that never closed. Veari watched him carefully, studying the silent ritual of human grief, not something mourned and done, but carried like a lantern through shadow. The soil necklace never left his hand. He wore it now like armor, fragile and sacred. But while Elias mourned, Veari faced a different struggle, one that came from the stars. The message Mira had recorded, the one never meant to be found, had triggered ancient warning systems hidden deep within Corellian intelligence networks. A protocol Veari hadn't known existed until it activated. A recall beacon pulsed through their vessel, silent but undeniable. The Jazath had been compromised, deemed culturally infected. A retrieval fleet was en route not to rescue, but to sanitize. All contact with the human relic was to be erased. Including Elias, Veari stood before their command console, breathless in a way their species did not understand. They watched the pulsing red light, a heartbeat of impending erasure. Their crew had already begun preparing the ship for forced shutdown. The Emberkin didn't know what was coming. Elias didn't either. But Veari knew. The High Assembly wasn't coming to debate or question. They were coming to silence. To burn away this inconvenient spark of human empathy before it spread any further. They found Elias sitting beneath a fake tree, sunlight shimmering against his pale skin. He had grown stronger, though age still hung on him like heavy cloth. He was speaking with a child, telling them stories of birds that once soared over Earth's blue sky. Veari interrupted quietly. We need to talk. Elias stood, sensing the change in their tone. What is it? Veari hesitated. My people, they know you're alive. They're coming, not to help. Elias didn't flinch. To clean up the mess. Veari nodded. To erase the data. Your story. You. Asterisk, there was a long silence. Only the wind machines humming. Then Elias spoke, his voice low but firm. You said you preserve life. You chose to save me. Why tell me this now? Veari's voice trembled. Because I want to help. But helping you now would mean betraying everything I was built to protect. My people, my station, my very name. Elias didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Now you know how I felt. Watching her ship fly away, knowing I'd never see her again. We all have to choose something worth breaking for. Asterisk. Veari looked away, their form rippling with conflict. If we run, they'll hunt us. You'll die. This colony may be destroyed. Elias laid a hand on their shoulder, then help them disappear. Help them scatter like we once did. Make sure the children live. And take the stories with you. Veari was silent. Elias leaned in, voice cracked. With old pain. I didn't survive just to die forgotten. And Myra didn't sing to the dark so it could go quiet again. The Emberkin Council gathered that night. Elias, now fully awake, stood before them not as a relic, but as a messenger. "They're coming," he said simply, "to wipe this place away. Not because you're dangerous, but because you dared to carry us with you." The council was afraid, but something in Ilias's voice, firm, not loud, ignited a deeper resolve. "Then we scatter," said the eldest, "like fireflies into the dark." And Viari, breaking every law that had to find their life, offered coordinates, cloaking drives, and escape protocols stolen from the Jazoth. "This," they said, "is my betrayal and my freedom." But there was one problem. The beacon could not be silenced from orbit. It had to be destroyed manually from the Jazoth's core. Elias knew the ship better than anyone now. And he knew what that meant. Viari argued, "I can do it. I should be the one." But Elias shook his head. "You've got the future in your hands. I've already made peace with my past." That night, he recorded one last message for the Emberkin, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "If you're hearing this, then we've made it out. Not by conquering, not by hiding, but by remembering who we are. We're the ones who stay when others run. The ones who sing when others go silent. We're human. And we love like fire." Then, with Viari by his side one last time, Elias stepped into the darkness of his old tomb ship, not afraid, not alone. The countdown began, and far above, the stars watched. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The halls of the Jazoth were colder now, emptier. The ship had once felt like a vessel of observation and quiet logic, but now it pulsed with sorrow. Viari walked beside Elias in silence, the hiss of the air recyclers whispering like ghosts. They had gutted the systems, transferred what they could to the Emberkin ships, and now stood before the last remaining core, the transmitter. Sleek, humming, and glowing with the angry red of a siren that no longer screamed, just waited. A heartbeat, still loyal to its cruel cause. Beyond the glass viewport, stars wheeled in graceful silence, and in the distance barely visible was the oncoming storm, the retrieval fleet. 3 cruisers? Cold and clean, unyielding. Elias took a deep breath, his body aching with every step. "Never thought I'd come back here, thought I'd die in that cryo bed. But now," he looked down at his trembling hands, "now I get to choose." Viari stepped forward, their voice low and urgent. "You don't have to do this. We can set explosives, timers, remote charges." Elias shook his head. "They'll detect it. Disarm it. But if I stay behind, they'll see the damage as a human malfunction. No one will question it. They'll erase me, but not the story." He looked at Viari, then truly looked, and in their alien gaze, he saw not the cold shimmer of logic, but grief. Real and terrible. "You became more than I expected," he said gently. "You listened, you felt. That's more than most of my kind ever managed." Viari reached out, the motion unsure, but their hand met his, alien fingers curling around. "Human bone, I was designed to watch," they said. "But you taught me to remember." Their voice cracked at the edge. "There are no words in my language for what you've done, for what you're doing." Elias smiled, the lines on his face deeper now, but filled with peace. "Then maybe your people need new words." He stepped past the final lock, entering the chamber. The door is sealed behind him. Viari watched through the glass, hand pressed to the barrier. Elias approached the core slowly, each movement deliberate. He placed the photo worn, faded, still hers, at the foot of the console, then the necklace. Then, with one last exhale, he began the override. Outside, alarm sounded. The fleet had arrived. From the lead cruiser, a transmission barked across. "The void. Jazoth, respond. Identify the anomaly. Submit for sterilization protocol." Viari ignored it. They stared into the flame, into the human who refused to let his daughter's song die in the silence. Inside, the lights began to flicker. Power surged. The transmitter choked. Elias's body, frail and pushed beyond its limits, trembled, but he held the final key. He looked up once more, toward the viewport, and though Viari could not hear him, they knew what he said. For her. The core exploded in a bloom of light that burned without sound. A wave of cascading energy tore through the Jazoth's spine, reducing the transmitter to molten glass and ash. The fleet outside blinked, momentarily blinded. Sensors scrambled. The command AI registered a catastrophic failure self-induced. No enemy contact. No survivors. Just silence. Viari stumbled back, the shockwave trembling through the walls like a death knell, but they did not flee. They watched until the fire burned out, until the stars reclaimed the emptiness. Then they turned and whispered to the darkness, "His story is safe." By the time the fleet docked, Viari was gone, so was the crew. So was every trace of Elias Ward, save for what now floated quietly in the Emberkin archives, his voice, her song, their truth. Not as a file, not as a myth, but as a seed dot in the days that followed. The assembly issued no statement. The incident was marked as equipment failure, case closed. But whispers began to spread, among the observers, among the archivists, of a human who sang the dark into memory, of an alien who chose to feel, of a people who had been erased but never truly gone. Vayari, now in exile, drifted between stars aboard a salvage shuttle. In their memory core, they kept one fragment untouched. A single audio log, Myra's voice laughing. He always said stars weren't cold, that if you listened close, they were singing. I think he was right. And across the galaxy, unknown, to the assembly, children began singing songs their ancestors never taught them. Songs of flame, of sorrow, of promises kept. The stars did not mourn, they never had. They spun in their cold brilliance, indifferent to sacrifice, blind to love. But deep within the pockets of silence, scattered across the galactic rim, echoes began to bloom. Not the mechanical pings of machinery or the encrypted frequencies of warships, but songs. First one, then another, then dozens. Children's voices humming lullabies in languages long thought lost. Soft melodies carried through the thin air of asteroid domes and hollowed moons. Songs that made no sense to those who hadn't lived the pain, but meant everything to those who had. Vayari wandered among these quiet rebellions like a shadow. Turned guardian. They never stayed long in one place, never gave a real name, but wherever they went, they brought stories. The story of a man who gave up his world for a child. Of a girl who grew into the kind of leader who saved others as her father once had saved her. Of a song, soft as breath, that survived the cold vastness of extinction, and they never needed to prove it. Because those who heard the stories already knew, they felt them. That was what made humanity terrifying to the old galactic order not their weapons, but their hearts dot in a low-orbit market dome circling a red dwarf star. Vayari once met a young boy with skin like golden copper and eyes too old for his years. He sang quietly while repairing a solar filament words Vayari recognized, though the language had changed. "Where did you learn that?" they asked. The boy shrugged. "My mother used to sing it." She said her mother learned it from her grandmother. "We don't know where it came from. Just feels right." Vayari sat beside him for a long time, just listening, and in that moment, they realized the truth Elias had known all along. Legacy isn't metal. It's not data or archives or monuments. It's breath passed between generations. It's lullabies. In places where no lullabies should ever be heard. It's hope spoken aloud by those who shouldn't have survived long enough to carry it. The High Assembly remained silent. The Jazath was never replaced. Vayari became a myth and their own records lost. To circumstance, believed corrupted by exposure to humanity. But that was the final beauty. They had been corrupted. Touched by something impure and imperfect and completely unstoppable. They had changed, and they were not alone. Other observers whispered questions in back channels. Other archives played. Forbidden's voices in hidden corners. The virus of human resilience had spread, not through violence, but through story. Through empathy. One day, years later, Vayari found themselves on a frostbitten moon where nomads still lit fire in glass towers. A young girl there wore a necklace of brownstone. Familiar soil. When asked, she said it had belonged to her great-grandmother. She called it Earth, the girl explained. She said, "We don't have a homeland anymore. But that doesn't mean we don't have a home." And in that girl's eyes, Vayari saw her Myra. Just for a moment. The tilt of the chin, the spark. And the gaze. A memory reborn in flesh dot of Vayari, once commander, once exile, now wanderer, knelt and whispered, "He would be proud of you." The girl smiled, puzzled. "Who?" Vayari smiled back, and in their own voice, now older, now weathered by time and warmth, they answered, "A man who taught the stars how to remember." Above them, the night was quiet, but not empty. The sky was thick with songs, songs that needed no translation, songs that outlived ships and fleets and protocols. Songs that said one simple, defiant truth: we were here. We loved, and we are. Not forgotten dot in the end. The darkness did not win, because someone, somewhere, always kept singing.